You could say this is an extended series. We started talking about what it would look like if we really and truly centered on Jesus and followed Jesus and did what Jesus did, both as individuals and as a church. We started that on July 4th with our Declaration of Dependence. Yeah, you heard me right. Our declaration of dependence on God and independence from the world. Our dependence on God. Then we talked for several weeks about being a church in recovery. Recovery from our addictions to rules, rituals, and traditions. And we found out that Jesus was a rule breaker. If Jesus had to break a rule to love someone, Jesus broke the rule. And Jesus took the rituals and traditions that had developed over the centuries around the Jewish faith and reinterpreted those in light of God's love for everyone. Changed the rituals and the traditions. Broke the rules. Because, Jesus changes everything. Big, bold, simple. That's why that's up there. Jesus changes everything. So when we were looking for a model of what it would look like as individuals in a church, we went to the book or the letter that the Apostle Paul wrote to his favorite church in Philippi, the letter to the Philippians. It's the most joyous letter that Paul ever wrote. But there were things happening in the church in Philippi. There was division and stuff. Right in the center of that letter, in chapters 2, 3, and 4 of Philippians, in the first chapter, chapter 2, it's all about humility. And we talked about that for a couple of weeks. It's all about humility. Chapter 3 starts to address that division within the church. Those who believed you had to do this first, or those who believed you didn't have to do this first. The dividing line. Paul says, basically, if you know Jesus, there will be no division. If you know Jesus. And he says that by, people were saying, well, I follow Paul, or I follow this one, or I follow that one. They were dividing up among their leaders. And Paul said, don't do that. If anyone has a right to claim that they know Jesus, it's me, because if you know the history of Paul, he was like a perfect Jew. He knew every rule. He followed every rule. He was from the tribe of Benjamin. He was a Pharisee. Paul was a Pharisee. He knew every one of those 613 rules. And he followed every rule to the letter. And he persecuted the Church of Christ. He was the lead persecutor, isn't it? Just like God, to take the lead persecutor of the church and make that person and transform that person into the lead apostle of the church. So in chapter 3, Paul starts with, I have all the credentials anyone could possibly have, and yet I have nothing. You just heard the rest of chapter 3 in Psalm. That's Philippians 3. All I once held you, nothing. Paul, in Eugene Peterson's translation, he says, that's all dog poop. It's all dog dung. All that stuff I did, it doesn't matter at all compared to knowing Jesus. Knowing you, Jesus.
knowing Jesus is different than knowing about Jesus. All kinds of books written about Jesus. You can know all about Jesus. You can know everything Jesus said. You can quote every scripture in every circumstance and still not know Jesus. Until we actually do what Jesus did, imitate Jesus. That's how we know Jesus, instead of knowing about Jesus. How do you do that day to day? In his letter to the Romans, who needed to know how to do that, the Apostle Paul says, Romans 12, 1 and 2, here's what I want you to do. God helping you, take your everyday, ordinary life, your sleeping, eating, going to work, walking around life, and place it before God as an offering. Embracing what God does for you is the best thing that you can do for him. Embracing what God does for you is the best that you can do for him. Using what God gave you to glorify God is how you know Jesus. Don't become so well adjusted to your culture that you fit into it without thinking. Instead, fix your attention on God. You'll be changed from the inside out because Jesus changes everything. Fix your attention on God. Readily recognize what he wants from you and quickly respond to it. Unlike the culture around you always dragging you down to its level of immaturity, God brings out the best of you, develops well-formed maturity in you. Imitate Jesus in your everyday life, no matter what your job. Sweeping the floor, doing the dishes, writing a book, analyzing a medical test, visiting the sick. No matter what you're doing, do it to glorify God. God gave you a gift. God gave you a gift. And to not use that gift is a sin. Jesus calls that a sin. To not use the gift you were given to the glory of God. So in our humility, in our false humility, we think we have no gifts. We say, I'm not good at that. That's not my thing. I want to do this, even though I hear you telling me I should do this. God says, I have gifted you in a special way. How do you find out what your gift is? Man, woman, child, adult, how do you know what your gift is? Well, there are tools called spiritual gift survey that you can fill out, and it will direct you kind of a personanalysis to things that you are prone to do well.
Best way might be to do them.
Best way might be to try to do several things and see what happens. One of the best ways, and we don't often want to hear it, is your friends and acquaintances will tell you what your gifts are. They will say, you are really good at visiting. You are so hospitable. And you'll say, it takes a lot of time, takes a lot of effort, but you're so good at it.
It's not the one I wanted.
I know, you want it to be a tenor, but other people will tell you what you're good at, and we don't want to often hear that because it's not what we want to do. Listen to other people, listen to God, and use your gift. I'm going to give you a chance right now to scoot next to the person behind, in front, or next to you on the pew, and if you don't know them very well, get to know them. Tell them what you think they're good at, or or what you see in them, or tell them what you think your gift is and how you use it. Just take a couple minutes, talk with each other about gifts.
That's hard to do. You don't know people. He says there's a lot of installed. You need that to see the
So that's a gift.
I don't try to do as much of it.
What I call the silver tongue. With the message.
That was a gift that really earned over.
See, you have a gift of compassion. You have a gift of
I've taught school for years, and I have our psychiatric classes for the building. So right now, that's kind of gone by the wayside, which ways are a lot, because this is the problem. Sometimes you go step on the wayside. You can't find help within your church. You walk to a community sounds really confused. I don't know where to It does, because we have a group and it's really
Thank you for having that conversation. It appears we have a lot of gifts in this congregation, and we do.
It's available. Get up and do it.
Did you know that God created you with a very unique set of gifts that only you have? There'll never be another Stephanie. There never has been one. Stephanie is God's perfect creation to be Stephanie with her gifts. God didn't give Stephanie those gifts for Stephanie. God gives us gifts to serve others, not for self-service. This is from a fellow named J.D. Walt in a daily devotional called Seedbed, with a Wesleyan Methodist slant. J.D. says, many things can attempt to fill the void of a godless life. All of the substitutes, all of them, every one, ultimately lead back to the same place. Oneself. In the absence of a living and personal relationship with the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, we invariably become our own God. It's that simple and that terrifying, isn't it? Instead of self-awareness, which is the become self-absorbed, which is the curse of sin. He goes on to say, once we lose sight of the divine other, who is God, we lose all capacity to see others or anyone other than ourselves. This is the default condition of the human race. You know what default is, right? Absent an intervention, you default back to that. We're going to default back to being our own God unless we constantly follow Jesus. Because self-centeredness blinds us to God, to others, and to see God in others.
The Apostle Paul never leaves you hanging in a letter. He always ends with some practical advice. Because that's all really great, but here's what it looks like. Here's how you keep from defaulting to our basic human nature. We're still in chapter 12, verses 9 through 13. Here's what you do. You love from the center of who you are. You don't fake it, because you can't fake it. You run for dear life from evil, and you hold on for dear life to good. Be good friends who love deeply. Practice playing second fiddle. Practice playing second fiddle. Don't burn out. Keep yourselves fueled and aflame. Be alert servants of the Master. Cheerfully expectant. Expect good things to come when you use your gifts. Don't quit in hard times. Pray all the harder. Help needy Christians and be inventive in hospitality. Just a few practical tips.
It's quite a list, isn't it? Let's start with 3 of those. Practice playing second fiddle. That's what the Message says. Other versions say, give priority to others. Give priority to others. Think of others first. It's that humility thing again. You can't run from it, can you? It's always about, am I your God or are you your God? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Most of the trouble in a church comes from someone who doesn't think that they're recognized, honored, or thanked enough. That's what causes divisions in churches. William Barclay says it's not easy to give each other priority and honor. There is enough natural instinct in most of us to want others to recognize our rights. Christians have no rights. They only have duties. Christians have no rights. You're a child of God. What do you need rights for? You only have duties. There's that default thing again. Keep yourselves fueled and aflame.
Rah, rah.
Rah, rah. On fire with the Spirit is the way other versions say it. On fire. Have passion. You know, when the Apostle John, well, we think it was the Apostle John, wrote Revelation, you know, that scary book at the end. The first part of it is it's letters to 7 churches in modern day Turkey, and each church is told, here's what you're doing right, here's what you're not not doing so well. And there was one church, and the reason, if you remember this, is because God reserves God's special judgment for this church. Because they are lukewarm. They're not hot or cold about anything.
They're not making waves.
They're not doing anything. They're lukewarm.
Wow. Well, our friend Kurt says if you're not making waves, you're not going
Moving.
forward.
You're not
You're
going
just
in.
standing still.
Yep. We call it dead in the water for
Friend
sailors.
Kurt.
Dead in the water. There's a reason it's dead in the water. You know the modern version of lukewarm? The text was quoted because it's, I couldn't care less. Well, what do you care about? You know, I couldn't care less. But Seinfeld changed all that. You know what it is now? Whatever. Whatever. When you're my age, that just makes your blood boil. Whatever. I don't know. Whatever. Okay. If you don't stand for something, you stand for nothing. So stand for Jesus. One of the last ones was cheerfully expectant. The key word that's used in most versions is rejoice in hope. Rejoice in hope. And William Barclay again, there are no hopeless situations in life. There are only men and women who have grown hopeless about them. You know what the opposite of hope is, right? It's fear. Just like it's the opposite of faith, fear. There can never be any such thing as a hopeless Christian. Are you getting a trend? There can be no hopeless Christian. There can be no solitary Christian. There can be no retired Christian. Get the idea? Because you can't retire a lifestyle. You can't lose hope in a lifestyle. There can be no such thing as a hopeless Christian.
It seems that we need to get over our past,
In ourselves.
our pain and our past, and not live in an atmosphere of victimhood. We have all heard Matthew 28, 25, and 28.
And 20.
That to live with hope is to live like Jesus. And I found this week, it's called the false Matthew 25. So the real Matthew 25, 31 to 45, I was hungry and you fed me, right? You know that. But a Christian blogger writes this, and listen carefully, because it's easy to fall into the trap and the cadence of what we think we hear. I was hungry, and you formed a humanities club and discussed my hunger. I was imprisoned, and you crept off quietly to your chapel and prayed for my release. I was naked, and in your mind you debated the morality of my appearance. I was sick, and you knelt and thanked God for your health. I was homeless, and you preached to me of the spiritual shelter of the love of God. I was lonely, and you left me alone to go and pray for me. You seem so holy, so close to God, but I'm still very hungry and lonely and cold. To know Jesus is to do what Jesus did. And then there will be no one lonely or hungry or cold.
Be like Jesus.